For more than 40 years and 1,600 columns, one journalist's quest for truth and honesty has taken him down many dark and seedy paths, unrelenting and unafraid. Guided by the light of truth, he has traveled many difficult journeys as a watchdog for all, ever vigilant. Then, one day, the presses fell silent. The newspaper for which he toiled closed forever. Undeterred, the scribe goes on.
This is the third and final segment of the Scribbler Publishing Group's podcast discussion about the future of newspapers in America and the challenges confronting the legitimate press. I'm Robert McFerren, the former art director of the Youngstown Vindicator, which closed its doors August 31st, 2019 after 150 years of trailblazing journalism. I, along with Bertram de Souza, retired editorial page editor and Sunday columnist of the Youngstown Vindicator, Cynthia Rickard, a veteran editor, and other longtime journalists, published the book No Holds Barred in honor of the Youngstown Vindicator. Since the closing of the paper, we have attempted to understand why so many daily newspapers are going out of business and why the legitimate press is under such intense financial pressure. We're also trying to determine the alternatives to the daily newspapers, if they're realistic and sustainable. To give us some insight into today's non-traditional delivery of news, we are joined by Carmen Gentile and Kim Palmiero, founders of Post-Industrial Media in Pittsburgh, a unique and interesting blend of magazine publishing and various digital platforms, including newsletters and podcasts. Carmen and Kim are veteran journalists who are pursuing new avenues for delivering the news. Post-Industrial Media covers several states, including Ohio. The two creators know a lot about the Mahoning Valley. Our three discussions on the media will appear on our website, scribblergroup.com, on our Facebook, and other online platforms. Joining me in today's conversation with Kim and Carmen are Bertram de Souza and Cynthia Rickard.
Kim and Carmen, welcome. Thanks for adding your voices to our discussion on the future of newspapers and the mainstream media. Your creation of post-industrial media drives home the point that the era of new newspapers cropping up is ended. But before we delve into the discussion, I'd like you each to tell us about yourselves and also your connections to the Mahoning Valley. So if you want to go first, Kim.
I started in print, like many of us. Loved it. Mostly knew that was what I wanted to do, and spent several years at different newspapers, mostly as an editor. Just had a great time. Very committed to what it means to be a journalist. I was always really wanting to, think that you can kind of change things with journalism and good writing, and I still believe that. But I really developed a passion for building things and find it very exciting and invigorating to just build things and innovate, which is a big word, but it's fun to try, right? I don't think it's fun to keep things the same. So I left my long-term employer, long story short, and had another business, got involved with post-industrial, and here we are. So that is the long and the short. I worked in Pennsylvania and also in Illinois. So really, and have traveled a lot through this region, and really, I think we both, Carmen will tell you, appreciate and understand sort of the dynamic, both as people who grew up in the region and have kind of left and come back and have seen how much it's changed. So Carmen can add.
Where are you from originally, Kim?
I'm from Crawford County near Erie.
Oh, yeah.
Right around Meadville.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
And that's your connection to the valley, right?
Well, my connection is indirect. My family, my uncle specifically, had some businesses, and many of his businesses with his partner were in the Mahoning Valley.
Names?
We talked a little bit. San Ray Corporation was the name of the company,
right.
and my uncle was Sandy Petruso.
Right.
So he had his partner, his name was Ray Travellini. Yeah, and he was also, it's kind of a post-industrial story. He grew up in the community where I grew up, of course, wanted to have a business in his community, wanted to improve his community, and so he stayed in his community, and of course, a little bit outside of it. They owned restaurants, hotels, gas stations, a nightclub, things like that, over time. So that was also really fascinating to watch growing up. And I worked in some of his businesses, and as a kid, as we all do when you have family businesses. So it was fascinating to watch and be part of.
So you did visit the valley. You used to.
Oh, yes. Yeah, periodically. I remember going to Niles sometimes. We had some family events there, and yeah, I remember kind of seeing it change. Interesting place, hearing people talk about how it changed, and the challenges and the struggles, really. So which continue for many of our communities today. But such a rich history, and your book, Bertram, is so great. It's so great to know that that's captured and memorialized. It's important to remember those stories.
How old were you when you saw Ray Boom Boom Mancini?
Oh, right. I'll have to send you a picture. How many times? I was probably 10 or 11.
Yeah.
10 or 11. So really seemed like a fun, very nice man.
Carmen, your background is sort of very exotic, given all of the places you've been to and all of the coverage, places you worked as a journalist. So, give us some of your background, and then we'll talk about the creation of post-industrial, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Western PA and started my journalism career at a small newspaper called the Valley News Dispatch, not far from and it happened to be the same paper that was part of a paper group that Kim worked for, Trib Total Media, although in those days it was owned by Gannett. And I eventually went on to work overseas as a journalist. My first time being in the late 90s, I moved to Cairo, and I worked there as a reporter, starting out at local English language publications in the city, and then expanding to being a stringer for a number of news outlets while I was based there. Eventually, I went on to return to the States, and I worked in Washington, D.C. I was there working during September 11. I used to cover Capitol Hill, the State Department, and a little bit of the White House. And after that, I went on to live in Brazil and was working there out of Latin America. And then I started to cover the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in 2005, and pretty much covered them both for the next decade or so, spending a lot of time with U.S. forces on the front lines, chronicling the fighting and whatnot. And then I was injured while reporting in Afghanistan in 2010.
Lost your sight, right?
Yeah, I was shot in the side of the head and partially blinded in this one eye, and had a lot of the bones in my face reduced to a packet of toothpicks after many surgeries and much convalescing. I eventually went back and resumed my work in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it was just a few years ago that I started Post-Industrial in 2018. First started then, and since then we've produced, what is it now, Kim? Eight issues of the magazine?
Yeah, we're on our 8th.
Right, and we have daily editions and podcasts, and we're doing video. And most recently, we were in the Mahoning Valley, stopped by Youngstown while we were making a film about reemerging in post-industrial America following the pandemic and the other issues that have reshaped the political and economic and social landscape of not only the region but the country. And we were doing this by motorcycle, which was a lot of fun because I'm an avid rider, and I brought along a friend of mine who's a fellow conflict reporter who also occasionally covers this region. And the two of us rode and had a film crew follow us on our adventure through Pennsylvania, Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. You know, when I was very young, I used to come to Youngstown occasionally because my dad was taking night classes at Youngstown State, and he'd occasionally bring me, and I thought that was really a kick, even though we were sitting in accounting courses that I couldn't be duller, I can imagine, for an 8-year-old, but I thought it was really cool because we were going to Ohio to go to school. You know, as it pertains to post-industrial, you know, this region, and I say this hopefully without a hint of hyperbole, is the place of the tipping point for not just post-industrial America, but for the entire country, and by extension, the world. You know, the handful of people who voted and tipped the scales for Trump in 2016 in places like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin changed the course of history for the next 4 years. And I don't mean for the better. But, you know, this region is so important and so impactful that that's one of the reasons why we created post-industrial in the first place. But the fact of the matter is, as you were, you know, well aware, so many news sources are going away in the region, and thus it's actually aiding in the misunderstanding of ourselves and as we represent to the outside world, because you do get the occasional reporter from national media that come into post-industrial America and, you know, parachute in for a story for a couple of days and think they have taken the pulse of a region that they only really pay attention to every 4 years during elections. So, you know, what we've discovered through post-industrial is that there is a great thirst for the kind of things that we're doing. And as we get out in front of more eyes and have more people listen to us and see our videos, we're realizing that we're onto something as it pertains to paying closer attention to such a vital part of the country.
The transition from newspaper journalist to online, digital, non-newspaper journalism. Two things strike out. You're both very talented journalists who've left our business, and I still consider it our business, even though the Vindicator closed its doors. And Cindy has been at the Vindicator for 41 years. I was there 40. Robert was there 30. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's sort of, when talent such as yours leaves the newspaper business, what does it say? What's the message that's being imparted? I mean, is it a sense of hopelessness? Is it a sense of recognizing what the future is? So, you know, what was the genesis of post-industrial that said to you, you know, we have to get out of newspapers?
Do you want to?
Both of you.
Yeah. Yeah, I could address that.
Sure.
I think that look, everybody's love of newspapers and those who have given their lives to filling them with important, impactful, and entertaining stories has to come to the harsh realization that is an unrequited love.
Okay.
That's it. It's unrequited. We love it. I do. I love newsrooms, but newsrooms that I grew up in, that we all grew up in, that newsroom that you showed me, that was probably full of profanity and laughing and arguments, that doesn't exist anymore. It's because I've been in newsrooms in the 21st century, and everyone's wearing headphones and nobody says a word. And that's just the way it is. And I feel like there's room to grow and produce good daily breaking news in a quote unquote newspaper fashion without the newspaper. Mm-hmm. It can be done. And I think that we need to best serve our communities by recognizing that fact and figure out, okay, how do we do this in a way that is informative and also beneficial to the person who's producing it in a fair, competitive, life-sustaining way in terms of wages. Mm-hmm. So, like, we got to move past the idea that there's somebody going to be rolling off broadsheets, tens of thousands of broadsheets off a press anymore. It's going away, and so we have to be prepared for doing the important work. And I think that we're involved in that as well, of continuing to keep people informed in a fashion that they're going to not only accept but enjoy.
Kim?
I mean, I think journalism is quite a portable concept. And so, to echo what Carmen said, I love newspapers. I wrote a little, blog about how much I love newspapers and the newsroom, and I went to meetings two meetings a day for years on end to, pick the front page and all that type of thing. But I think, having a business model that supports journalism and allows you to create journalism that informs but maybe can change things is still a really portable concept. And that is what I wanted to do. I left my last job of my own. I prepared years before by starting another little side business, had nothing to do with journalism, because I knew that, the way the math was working, that it just wasn't going to work, and I didn't want to stay in one place for the rest of my days. Not that it was bad; it was great, but there was other things to be done, and so I think that it's newspapers are, hopefully we're taking the best of newspapers and just sort of packaging it in a different way. I think podcast, video, on the upside, there's a lot that we can do, of course, online with multimedia that newspapers didn't quite have, were never able to do. I mean, because it didn't exist. I mean, podcast, video. I mean, we can reach people in all kinds of different ways, which is great. So trying to focus on sort of the opportunities, I think is where, what we want to do. But I certainly, and applying a business model to it, I think is extremely, of course, very important. It's fun and it's very important. It's challenging. But I too love that newsroom.
Yeah.
So,
I have to say, you were talking about all the quote unquote talent that we have at Post Industrial that used to be in newspapers. I'm looking at your video and all that talent there. You just mentioned about a century's worth of experience at the Vindicator, sitting at that table. Like, you're already putting that talent to use in a new medium that we're doing it in a podcast. And we're having an important discussion, but you have all the tools sitting at that table to create quality daily journalism. I mean, the rest is just semantics and planning. Like, it's all right there. Right there.
I'd like to say I woke up one morning and said, I really want to be part of this new media thing. That didn't happen. It's because circumstances demanded that I do this. But let me suggest something. I was one of the first people at the Vindicator to have a Facebook page because I was writing the column. I refused to post on it. And so, because I just
You
said...
only had a Facebook page because somebody else created
They
it.
created it for me and said, here, do something with this. And I said, no, if somebody wants to read my column, let them buy the paper. And I'm from the other camp, because when we started a website, I volunteered to be the first news editor, and we developed the news website from that. So I understand what you're saying. My question is, the part of the value of newspapers was, in a democracy, was that broad breadth of information and those stories that would come in front of people that they wouldn't read or they wouldn't seek out. So we had an opportunity to enlighten them and inform them and perhaps broaden their outlook. How do you address that in a digital world and online? Because obviously you're reading one story at a time, and it seems like
right now, particularly in this country, we are so polarized that we are looking down our own rabbit holes and reading the stories that already tell us and affirm what we believe. So how do you address that in a digital world?
I know this is blasphemy for all of you to hear, but digital is way better than paper. It just is. You know why? Because I can go back and I can not only read the story that I was reading, on my phone or in my computer or my tablet without having to cut down a tree, but I can also read the last 15 stories leading up to that story if I so choose to have a greater depth of knowledge about the subject I'm perusing.
And that's my
You
point.
can't do that in a newspaper. In a newspaper, you don't have institutional knowledge the way that you do at your fingertips, I should say, as you do with digital.
But you have to be interested in that story that's in front of you to start to go back through those. That's what I'm.
That is correct.
How do we address that digitally?
Okay. Another hard fact is that there were only 13 channels during the heyday of newspaper. Now the Vindicator was not only competing with other news channels or news outlets, but the Vindicator was competing with Netflix. The Vindicator was competing with YouTube.
Yeah.
The Vindicator was competing with every other digital streaming entertainment could be possible, take my attention away from the news thing in the world. And we're not going to get the same number of people to read our stories. We can continue to try, but we're not going to, because there's too many distractions. I didn't even name the largest one.
So there really is no answer to combating the polarization.
No, like right now, I feel like in America, we need to actually, things probably have to get worse before they get better. I think that's, we saw, say, on January 6th, in terms of our polarization, is just the beginning until things get worse, until there's a critical illumination of, whoa, we were under this spell of delusions that we just willingly accepted because our lives suck or whatever the reason may be. We got to get. I feel like as a nation, we're going to be continuing to be that polarized. But in the meantime, like, we just have to keep hammering the truth in the way we know how to do it in our respective reporting, and figure out new ways to cut through the noise. And we're not going to do it with rolling out newspapers anymore. We're going to figure out how to do it in different ways. Your podcast is doing that right now. This conversation that we're having is part of that process. And things like the podcast that you're creating can be a great companion to whatever reporting you still want to do. But they have to play off each other in a way so that people who maybe don't read as much as we would like, and that's basically everybody, might get their information some other way. We just have to accept it. We can't just keep bashing our heads against the brick wall wondering why we can't get through.
Kim?
Yeah, I agree. And I would also say that I think what made the institution of newspapers so effective in part is that people trusted them, right? Every town had a newspaper, and many towns still do. They lack the capacity that they once did, clearly. However, local news is so important. We all know, but the reason that it also works is because that newspaper had a relationship with its readers. When I had a group of local newspapers, people feel a certain ownership over the paper and with the outlet, the paper. And I think that, it is not a given that every community is going to have a news media outlet of record, a newspaper of record in the traditional sense. I think that we can create community and connection within a different kind of media company. And I mean, that's what we're doing. We're not, so what we're doing is we're creating connection and trust and community. And I think, it is not the same in the sense that, you're reading everything kind of the record of your town necessarily, but it is journalism delivered in different mediums, different ways, about a region that has a rich heritage, a lot of challenges, and we want to slide in some, hard news, maybe some things that people might not otherwise read, trick them into reading. And so, but I think that that's really key. I think that that is what modern media companies can do still, is have that connection and trust and community.
How do you reach your market? You guys cover 12 states. Newspaper, it came to you. You guys, nowadays, we have to push news to our base, to get to look at us and see us. How are you guys finding a success in reaching, into your coverage area?
Well, I think it's always like building a house. So we have a lot of ways that we ask people to subscribe directly. We have digital editions that go to specific readers in specific communities, and we're going to be having more of those. And so, we try to have a lot of the states represented through our work. We'll be doing more of that. And so that's just a very broad brush. It is certainly not local coverage as a local news outlet would do, but, we're touching on issues differently. Right. And Carmen can add to that.
Yep.
Yeah, so, we've created what Kim has previously called aptly, and I really like this term. It's what do we call post-industrial America? It's psychogeographical.
Mm-hmm.
It's a combination of the Rust Belt and Appalachia, right where and a place like Pittsburgh, the Mahoning Valley, Weirton. Those places would be, I would say that they are the nexus of those two, where those two regions intersect, right? So what we've done is showcase a region that has historically and very recently had a great impact on our nation, both in the industrial era, the Mahoning Valley, Pittsburgh, Weirton. You could say those three areas built America without a hint of exaggeration. All the steel that came out of those places, correct? Yep. They just straight up built it. Yep. And now it's been decimated by the losses due to deindustrialization. And in our new post-industrial era, we have to look at it through that lens of, this is what we talked about this previously, Bertram, you and I, about how, Trump promised to reopen the steel mills in the Mahoning Valley when half of them were gone. They were leveled. And the other ones had been shuttered for 40 years, and you just don't flip on a switch and then molten steel starts pouring out. And the people knew that.
But they believed him.
They believed him because they didn't really believe him. They believed him because they just wanted to believe something that was, to the rest of us, right? Yeah. So in a podcast, they can't. In the video, people can enjoy what I just did, but it's. And that same delusion about things coming back that once were is not serving us either in the news media business. We have all this institutional knowledge, and we've decided to put it to a different use because the old use that we were so used to having is gone. I'm actually right here. It just so happens on my desk is sitting a copy of USA Today that I picked up when I was on the road doing this recent moto journey through post-industrial America. And I used to write for this paper. I've written hundreds of articles for this paper in Afghanistan and Iraq and other parts of the world. And the front section, the A matter material, is 8 pages, and it is devoid of anything resembling what I used to do for them in Afghanistan. It just does. There's no place for it. One of the reasons I created Post-Industrial is because I needed to find a job. I had to build my own job, and that's where we all are. We all have to just come to Jesus moment where we're like, okay, shit, those days aren't coming back. Now what do we do? Let's take this
Okay,
institutional knowledge that we've acquired and put it to good use and to continue informing people the best way we can.
We're all veteran journalists here. The underpinnings, at least for newspapers, in my opinion, was ethics. We were ethical in what we did. Is there an ethical imperative for digital? What kind of rules are being followed to ensure that the kinds of rules that we did? I always keep saying one of our most important employees at the Vindicator was our lawyer from Cleveland. Because he defended me in so many lawsuits, and he used to read our stories that were controversial or that were iffy legally, and he'd have a say because of the concern that you not only wanted accuracy, but we didn't want to cross those lines that shouldn't be crossed. How do you deal with that? Go ahead, either one.
You want to take that, Kim?
It's funny because I was talking to someone the other day, and I was talking to them about the lawyer that I used to talk to regularly at my former employer, the Trip. And I would joke with the attorney. I would say, I really like talking to you, but I hope I don't talk to you again for a long time. Right? Because every time we had a conversation, it was always something potentially bad or an open records request that we got rejected and we were appealing. I think that in terms of, I hope this is answering the question correctly. There's certainly a lot of pitfalls, right, that you can get into writing anything. And I think it's even easier to get into pitfalls and ethical dilemmas when things are online, right? Because the world is secret. And you have to just take great pains. We do have, ethics guidelines. We have our policies on our website under, I think, frequently asked questions. We try and be real transparent about that. And I think, for our part, we talk things through and my mantra is always, if you're having sort of dilemma about something, what is the right thing to do? And sometimes it's not always black and white. But you sit, you talk it through, you think about it, what is the right thing to do? And that's what we try. We follow what we think are best practices. We try, always try to be very fair. I will say that I think it is the Wild West out there in terms of what people call journalism. And it's kind of, a sore point for me. I mean, people will say, this is journalism, that's journalism. No, it's not. It's boosterism. It's marketing. It's not journalism. Right. So I think that there's a lot of just stuff written in general that is not news. And for me, that's kind of, I look at it and I feel like that isn't ethical to necessarily say, X or Y is a news site when it's mostly
exactly.
marketing. Yeah. So make that.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that the era of the journalism ethics as a broad idea in America, that era was very small, and it was during our collective period, because we all are roughly around the same age and worked during the same periods, but before us, during the Hearst era of newspapers, they made up all kinds of bullshit and started wars and did all kinds of crazy stuff. All right. And there were like 17 newspapers in New York City, and half of them were just propaganda rags. Right. So
but it wasn't as litigious a society at that time.
No, it wasn't as litigious a society either. There's an old story. I had a great, this is a great industrial story for the post-industrial era. My great-grandfather, his name was originally Giovanni Gentile, and they changed it to John Gentile. He worked at Alcoa for years and years and years, and at the age of 62, a huge bundle of aluminum piping fell on top of him, crushed him, killed him instantly.
Oh my God.
And the story goes that a rep from the company came to my grandparents' house, said, "Your father, my grandfather's house, your father's died. Here are some flowers, and I think a handshake." That's as far as it went. That was it. There was no windfall
Right.
for the extended Gentile clan. I haven't seen any of that money. There was nothing. Flowers. Sorry it happened. Next in line to work the work that his spot on the floor. Like
today, you own the
things
company.
Things are a hell of a lot different now.
Yeah.
And in terms of as it pertains to our ethics, you have all that institutional knowledge on the other side of the screen. You guys know what's right and wrong.
Right.
And yes, the lawyer is very helpful. Not having one sucks. But, if you want to start your own media thing, if you wanted to figure out a way to reconstitute journalism there in a way that you see fit, calling on your institutional knowledge, just talk to Kim about what kind of insurance you need to carry. I don't know.
Very big on lawyers and insurance.
So
you pay a lawyer, as little as possible and do the best you can.
So when you created Post-Industrial, did you, unlike newspapers that that provided comprehensive news on all issues, Section A, Section B, society, obituaries, sports, all of that kind of stuff in one package. When you created Post-Industrial, and now as Post-Industrial exists today, what is it? How would you describe it to somebody? What is your goal? What role are you playing as far as being journalists? And what are you trying to accomplish here? Either one.
No, you go first.
Oh, you're gonna put me on the spot with this one.
I'll just say we want to change media, and then Carmen.
Well, we wanted to better explain and cover a region that is grossly misunderstood by the national media.
I agree.
Again, going back to the 2016 election, I had a chance a few years back to speak to an editor at the Washington Post just as we were getting Post-Industrial off the ground. And I was very candid about my displeasure with how they covered the Rust Belt in Appalachia. And I told them, you know what, if I have to read one more story from you people and Politico and everybody else from that same diner in Johnstown telling me how you have your thumb on the pulse of this region, I'm going to blow my brains out. This is ridiculous. You guys, you don't know what's going on. And this guy looked me dead in the eye and he said, yeah, you're right. We screwed that up. Yeah. I was like, yeah, well, what are you going to do about it? They did the same thing in 2020. I don't know why, but they, maybe not as bad, but they send people into a remote corner of post-industrial America and say, go talk to 3 people in a diner and tell us what's going on.
Yeah. It's quick and easy.
Quick and easy, and they think that's the solution. I remember when after the 2016 election, I had a friend working at the Atlantic. This is before we conceived of post-industrial. And he told me that they were looking for somebody to better understand the Rust Belt. And I was like, okay, I'm your guy. And here's all the reasons. And I gave them my resume, which is everything that has to do with my work overseas and all that stuff. Well, all those impressive bells and whistles that you collect on a resume. But alongside that resume, I gave them a bullet point list of why I was qualified for that job. And the bullet points included things like, I've gone swimming in an above ground pool. I've been to a dirt track race, a motocross race and like class 3 midget car in a dirt track, up in Lernerville Speedway. I know these people. I know a lot about this region. My father owned a machine shop that he eventually sold. I watched my hometown deteriorate because Alcoa pulled up and everything just went to shit. Like, that's why I would be good at that job. And of course I didn't get it because, I didn't really want somebody. They didn't really want somebody who was going to tell them hard truths about the fact that they were just woefully incapable of understanding because for whatever reason, they whatever it is, it doesn't matter.
I'm surprised you didn't say I also like a shot and a beer when I go to a bar.
Yeah, I mean,
because
that's just
that's
Yeah.
part of this part of the area of the country.
exactly. Yeah, I understand. But they really didn't want that. They thought they did for a hot second, and then they moved on to doing another 30,000-foot view think piece about what's wrong with Middle America.
But now Cindy and I have a disagreement on this because in my coverage or in my reporting for the Vindicator, I believed that organized crime, public corruption, rich and famous using their money, to gain benefit, the arrogance of inherited wealth among some of the families in the region. I believed that was very much a part of our story, and it needed to be told. It needed to be focused on, much to the chagrin of people in the newsroom and in the community. And I kept saying...
What did I disagree about?
Because she said I was too negative about things like that.
Well, I didn't say you shouldn't cover it, but, there were times when he was, like a broken
She used to edit the
record.
Sunday column on Saturday nights. and so I'd get a call
He would
from
cross
her.
the line from time to time.
Bertram? No.
And so,
Yeah, right.
but who's going to cover those things? Who's going to pull the scab off?
Yeah.
You are. Just keep doing it. Figure out, but all you have to do is figure out how to get people to read what you're writing. That's the technical part.
That's the challenge.
That's the technical challenge. But the institutional knowledge and the journalism, you still have all that.
Yeah.
So
Just
you got the
inside
hard
the
part
daily
taken care
paper.
of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just not inside the daily paper, but elsewhere.
Right.
And I think that's it. To just kind of keep going and presenting it in a somewhat different way. An example that I like to talk about is, there's a lot of really important stories, right, that we did in a traditional newspaper that had to do with sort of misspending
Right.
at the state level. A favorite is always how are the legislators spending money, right? There's always little surprises in there. How are people spending money? The local township. I had somebody did one time. It was
Whose relatives
very
are getting hired?
they're going and they're buying mullet wigs at Sam's Club. You find different things. I'm not saying it's everywhere, but it's there. So how do you get people to read those stories? How do you get them to care about it? Because sometimes they can be kind of dry. Well, we find different ways to present them. We tell them a little bit differently. And that's kind of what I think. Just keep going. Every social media, platform is a somewhat different audience. I think there's opportunities to present that information in slightly different ways for each one, right? And it can be challenging, but the world is our newsroom. I love to say that, right? So instead of having sort of a defined geographic area that a local newspaper would have, the world is our newsroom. And so I think that is, it's a kind of it's intimidating, but at the same time, there's great opportunity there. I think to tell stories that, they're not going to resonate with a local audience, with everyone in a local audience, but you have the opportunity to tell them things that will resonate with people there and beyond.
So what do you want America to know about post-industrial America? You've talked about how the Washington Post, New York Times send in reporters during an election, and they talk to 3 people, and they think they know about, what I still refer to as the Rust Belt and the aftermath. What are you trying to message are you trying to convey, or what stories are you trying to convey about post-industrial America?
That we're not a collection of out-of-work steelworkers, coal miners, and opioid addicts. We have a little bit more to us than that. I was just in Scranton during my journeys, and a columnist, that would be the Bertram de Souza of Scranton, Chris Kelly, told me, "Oh, you'd like this guy. This guy just pulls no punches. You got to read this. Go look at this guy's columns.
Okay.
You'd really appreciate it. He gives 0 Fs. So, he told me, again, he was complaining to me, unprompted by me, by the fact that national outlets were popping in on Scranton from time to time leading up to the election and taking the temperature, so to speak. And he said inevitably they all described the city as the one-time hard scrabble coal town. And this guy's like, God damn it, there hasn't been a coal mine opening around here since the 60s. Why do they keep calling us that? And that's what that was my point of the piece I wrote. It had nothing to do with coal, really. It was the fact that the only Scranton I knew of was from The Office. I was like, oh, there's actually a Scranton other than Michael Scott Scranton.
Yeah.
So I wrote a story about the fact that, I know this place through the lens of The Office. And I would go, when I went there, I went to one of the restaurants they mentioned in the show a lot. But then I went and I talked to this guy and I looked around the city and I started to get an inkling of what was happening. I wasn't just popping in. I'd said, I really don't know, but on first glance, there's a lot going for this town. Seems like it has its fair share of problems that Chris Kelly told me about, but it's, it has good bones, it seems. And I found it to be, quite interesting outside the context of Michael Scott.
That's why I'm glad you didn't call your site the Rust Belt. I'm really up to my eyeballs with the national press popping in and calling us the Rust Belt. It was 30 years ago. Let it go. We've moved on.
That's why I say it's post-industrial America.
Yeah.
There are the old factories that were once along the rivers in the Pittsburgh area are either gone or been converted into condos. Yeah. All right. Don't call the steel town. I mean, they still refer to Pittsburgh as a steel town. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. People who know better do that. Mm-hmm. People from this town who know that those days are long gone and never coming back.
But isn't that also a reflection of a sense of pride? Because, I mean, they call it steel town, but there was a certain amount of pride when you could talk about, the Mahoning Valley being the steel center of the Midwest. And all of the people who didn't need to have a college education would come out of high school and go and work in the mill because your grandfather worked there and your father worked there. And sort of provided good livings and good family livings for a lot of people in this region. So that's why I think there are some people who still cling to that description.
Yeah, I mean, they do. It's just, I think we want to show that we're more than, right? The beauty, the complexity, the culture, but we're also kind of nudging people to kind of like move ahead, right? We want to talk about issues around solar. We want to talk about issues around things like maternal health, which is, not the rates are not great in our region and in this country.
Right.
So we want to also, we have certain topics that we're focusing on news-wise, and it's very conscious. Some of those are selected because we know that maybe not other outlets are doing a lot on those topics. We want to do stories that nobody else is doing or can do.
Give us some examples. I'm sorry. Give us some examples of the stories that you want to do that nobody else is doing.
Go ahead, Kim.
Anybody.
Okay. The stories that I've done for post-industrial, I did a story about, I did a feature story about cannabis use among veterans. And I spoke to veterans from across the region who use medical marijuana and advocate for its legalization, not only for medical use, but for recreational use as well, as it would be a boon to a lot of our respective economies, right? But the fact of the matter is that we don't have lawmakers who can see past the 1950s.
Right.
In a lot of places, as you well know, in Ohio, and we have in Pennsylvania. We have those types of people who just can't, for whatever reason, get past themselves.
Yeah. I mean, and that was a great story. And by the way, is nominated for a local award. So that's great.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You know, I think things like, I just need to move together my thoughts. I mentioned maternal health.
Right.
I think that's really important. I think that, it's incumbent on news organizations to try and kind of nudge some of those conversations. What is going on? Are programs working? What is working in this community that could work in that community, for example? I think things around asking a question, we know that our economies in many of these communities need to change. There needs to be something different. What is actually happening? There's probably 3 or 4 different plans, at least. No, I can think of 3 that are kind of broad brush plans for revitalizing the economy in parts of Appalachia and in the Rust Belt. Okay, and that's great. What is happening? How long is it going to take? What is happening? So, I mean, that's one thing that I think has been done kind of piecemeal. It can go on and on, but
Yeah. For example, when we talked, Carmen, we talked about the brain drain from old industrial regions, and I gave an example of I didn't name him, but I'm sure you sort of discerned who I was talking about. A very rich individual who has, some very financially strong companies in the Mahoning Valley. Mm-hmm. 2 kids with college degrees, both living, one in New York City getting a master's at NYU soon. This already got it. Was going to continue living in Brooklyn and New York. And the daughter, an elementary school teacher who wanted to teach low-income children living in Florida, could come back here and be instant millionaires and don't want to come back here. And it's a story after story after story of people going off from young people going off from this region to get college education and not coming back. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you're finding as you sort of tour post-industrial America, and how is that being addressed? And is there a role that you can play, post-industrial media can play, in helping to at least shed light on that situation?
Yeah, I think we could shed light on it. I think we have. Just as a side note, I recently spoke to a realtor in Youngstown who told me that the market is really strong for houses near downtown. A lot of demand. Yeah, a lot of people gobbling up real estate around town. So something's going on there. I don't know what it is, but with all that institutional knowledge that I'm pointing at over there, you guys got to figure that out. You know something's happening. Right. I don't know why. Somebody's buying a lot of real estate. Again, as it pertains to what Youngstown can be or will be or should be, that's up for those folks who are investing in the community to determine. We spoke to a young man, a ceramicist, who has his studio over by Wick Park the day after we spoke to you. His name is Justin Reese. He is very talented, has a lot of pull on social media in terms of the popularity of his creations, and has been talking to even some A-list celebrities who want to buy his stuff and are also ceramic enthusiasts. I didn't know there were such a thing, but apparently there is. And he told me that young artists who can't afford the coasts are coming to places like Youngstown, and finding them to be not only affordable but delightful, because there's a young community that supports each other and is growing. That's cool. It's never going to be 8,000 guys, working 3 shifts at a mill. It's not. So you have to figure out different ways to patch it together. At post-industrial, we have to have multiple ways in which we generate revenue so we can keep telling stories. And I think that that's like a city like Youngstown has to say, okay, these mills aren't coming back. We have this school that's a great asset. How do we capitalize on that? How do we get people who go to school here to stay here?
Right.
How do we do that? And the school and the city have to figure out a way to work together to incentivize young people to do that. You've got a good housing stock there. You've got these giant mansions all over the place, and they're affordable compared to what you would pay in other cities.
Mm-hmm.
How do we figure out a way to entice people to come to Youngstown to reinvent it? I think that the pandemic is going to prove that a lot of people are who were separated from their families are going to be coming back home to their hometowns. I think that's a trend we're going to see.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that it's going to empty out New York, LA, and Chicago, but we are seeing people migrating from there and going elsewhere.
With remote work, they don't have to live in the cities
They don't
anymore.
have to.
Yeah.
No.
I mean,
Kim and I didn't see each other in person for how long, Kim? Months?
yeah, like
And we produced four issues of the magazine during COVID.
Huh.
I do think in person is better, but you can do it, right? So it's
Right.
a good option to have. I think in general that regions never really had to be savvy about drawing people because that was never an issue many, many years ago. And I think there's interesting examples in Ohio. Dayton has the Mayor Nan Whaley
Right.
has done interesting things there and boosted the population. I think what draws people is what Carmen touched on. You know, absent of everything else, people will be drawn to a cheap place to live. Real estate opportunity, and I think that's going to be what the draw of some of these areas are. Although it is getting a lot harder to buy in some of them.
The
So-
common denominator between Pittsburgh and the Mahoning Valley and all during the heyday of the steel industry was very strong community leadership. There were very strong community leaders, the old families that had a
Yes.
commitment to the region, that invested in the region, that did all kinds of, supported community events, the symphony, everything you can talk about, they did. In your travels and in both your experiences, how would you describe that leadership today in post-industrial America? Is there that kind of leadership, or is that something that needs to be looked at?
Are you talking like the old the Carnegie Mellon
Yes.
Frick
Those kinds,
tyrannical
yes.
oligarchs who also built libraries?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. You mean those guys that broke the backs of the working
Yes.
men
Yeah.
that were trying to get a fair wage during
Yeah.
the Homestead Steel
But created
strikes?
jobs.
But
So they
also-
could build
but also
universities
created
and
jobs.
libraries. Yeah.
They were a complicated breed of individuals, let's say. I'm not allowed to disparage those people, I know.
That's all right.
But
You
know,
You don't have a Carnegie Foundation grant, do you?
how
They can't sue us.
families will figure out a way. Don't worry.
Uh,
No, we have some of those in the emerging tech industry. I don't know if they're
Right.
going to prove to be as impactful or as powerful as a Carnegie or a Mellon or a Frick. But I don't know if we want them that way either. I feel like we are in a transition phase, even in Pittsburgh, which has done a pretty good job of reinventing itself,
Yes.
is now reinventing itself again for this new era where everybody seems to be enamored with the city again. I think that for a place like Youngstown that relied so heavily on its strong economic leaders and the organized crime leadership that forged
Right.
so much of the identity of the region, for better or for worse. And I say that without any criticism. I came from the most mobbed up town in America per capita, New Kensington.
Yes.
I mean,
Oh,
we
yeah.
were much smaller than Youngstown, but like per capita, we had more mobsters, I think.
All of the Youngstown mobsters we used to go to New Kensington on
Yeah.
Sundays for meetings.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
Yeah, they had
Yeah.
where they had to go to kiss the ring.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. So we're not going to go back to those days because we romanticize them. But if we were to all of a sudden have organized crime rings in Pittsburgh and the Mahoning Valley, would be horrified, right? if that would return.
Right.
There's a lot of room to wiggle. Again, going back to that ceramic artist that I spoke to after we spoke, Bertram. He told me it's kind of like the Wild West out here because he had to build this kiln, and if he wanted to build it within the city limits of anywhere else, it would have been a real pain in the ass. But because not a lot of people are apparently paying attention down at City Hall in Youngstown, he got the permit right away. And he's like, that's advantageous, right? That's advantageous that you can be creative and not have somebody step on your creativity with a bunch of bullshit forms. Like that's a good thing. Like let's take a bug and make it a feature.
There
right?
is a very
You've got all
strong.
this huge. What's that?
There's a very strong art community here.
Yeah, there is.
And
Yeah.
maybe because of the Butler, I don't know, but we have a lot of makers and a lot of artists, young artists.
Well, we had one time a lot of empty buildings that they could be creative
Yeah,
in too.
right.
So.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Those kind of people, the artist community is what's going to attract other kind of creatives eventually, and that's in the tech sphere,
Yeah.
right? That would be helpful. I mean, once you get the creatives, that attracts other kinds of creatives. I'm of the opinion that there's even artistry in an iPad. I mean, whoever made that and figured out how to do all the things that an iPad can do, there's art in that.
It's
somehow,
design.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
It's a gorgeous piece of technology.
yeah.
And I think that there are people who recognize that in industrial America, there's plenty of opportunity to do different kinds of creating and different kinds of manufacturing. I've been in talks with a company in Cleveland that makes electric motorcycles. And that to me is, and they're in some old like brass fitting factory, blah, 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 that hasn't been used for 40 years. And that's where they make this new tech. I think it takes good leadership in a city, and Pittsburgh was fortunate. I think in the 80s and 90s,
Right.
Kim would know better because this is more her beat. But like Mayor Caligiuri was saw that things were changing. Steel was dying, so the city had to reinvent itself. Pittsburgh had the cultural trust, which understood that downtown Pittsburgh was dying and on its knees. They needed to keep the light of quality entertainment, shining bright. So they created what's called the cultural district, like things like that. So it takes vision in your leadership. So I don't know if what that would entail in terms of your city council and your mayor in Youngstown to have that site to say, okay, the old ways are not coming back, but we have the following assets. We have the old infrastructure. We've got old factories that people can repurpose for other things. We've got cheap housing, and some of it's goddamn beautiful. The area around it is nice. Got the river. Like, list all your assets and then try to create your new community around them.
Yeah.
And I think too, along with that, a lot of these areas, a big challenge is going to be how do you do that in a sustainable and fair manner, right? Because housing has a way of squeezing people out.
Yeah.
And that's become a real problem. Historically, it's a major problem in Pittsburgh, and it becomes a problem in many areas. So that's certainly something that takes a lot of thoughtful leadership and planning and ingenuity.
So
I just had a question. You had brought up financing and how you have to continually find new revenue streams. In the research that I've done, there's been a number of potential sources, like endowments, foundations. One site I even said Google and Facebook should be taxed, or some kind of one community, I can't remember where it was, created a library-run source stream funding for local news. Do you have any thoughts on what might work, what's working for you?
I think that any business needs multiple revenue streams, and I don't mean I only say that because I feel like, you know, we all know that. However, journalism in general for a long time is propped up mainly by very specific kind of advertising, right? It wasn't even different kinds of advertising; it was one type of advertising. And so, you know, we try very hard to cultivate different ways to generate revenue. I will say that, you know, podcasting for us has been a big area of interest and one that we're, you know, we continue to emphasize and plan to continue to develop. On the advertising side, you know, we do produce podcasts for partners, for advertisers. I would say that what makes that side of what we do a little bit different is we really do try to lean into our journalism sensibility when we do that. And we find that, you know, the advertiser likes that. They want that. And that's really been great. It's great. And so it's been a real opportunity to be able to bring that kind of storytelling to podcast production. And so that's one way. You know, print is not default, is certainly not the default that, you know, in my heart maybe I would want it to be, but it's just the way it is. Some people still want print. You know, we have memberships. We are going to be doing more with emphasizing memberships, asking people to sign up. So those are a few things. Those are a few main things. We have some other things that we're going to be doing. But I think that in general, there is no, at least in my humble opinion, there is no one right way. There is the way that works for each business, and kind of getting to know your audience and what your goals are, and then just literally figuring it out and just saying, we're going to do this, we're doing it, and if one thing doesn't work, then we're going to go over here and try something else. And I think I will say that 2020 through the pandemic, it was interesting. We changed a lot of things, but we're gratified and really thankful that people supported us, and we're here, right? And we're growing, and it's tremendous. So, and video, I will say, I'll add too that we have interest in short documentary, producing short documentaries. I think that is a growing area of interest, and not just for us. I'm sure for many other people.
Yeah.
And in the production, Carmen's been involved in doing the documentary on post-industrial and doing the tour with the reporter from. He used to be with. He is or still writes for the Rolling Stone, right?
He writes for Rolling Stone, yeah.
Right.
He's an old friend of mine. We worked together like almost 20 years ago, and we've had similar career paths. You know, I'll run into him in Afghanistan, Iraq, or anywhere else in between.
Oh, okay, because when you came to town, there were two of you on your motorbikes, but you had a whole crew with you, including a young woman whose parents are from Canfield.
Right.
And I asked if she was going to visit her folks, and she said no, not on this trip. But anyway, that takes money, right? It costs money. So do you have to go out and find sponsors or underwriters for this documentary, for the stuff you're doing, or how does that work?
Yeah. So, do we want to give away all our trade secrets, Kim?
You don't have to be specific.
I would say in general that I think it's safe to say our attitude in general has been, if we have an idea and we think we can figure it out, we just figure it out and we try to get support for it. That's how some of our projects worked.
Okay.
And that's how that one in particular worked. And Carmen, we did have sponsors for that. This was something that was Carmen's idea, Carmen and Jason's idea. So maybe Carmen wants to add a little bit, but that was sponsor supported. And I do think that that is a good way that's a good way to get work produced. It really is, because for example, we had complete editorial control. When you talk about sponsored content or content that is sort of, it's not sponsored, but, there may be a feeling that there's a certain obligation to sort of present a certain way. We don't do that. And so, we have had some sponsored content on our site, but we very little, and we label it, right? So this was true sponsor-supported work, and it was great. It was great partnerships. We had great local partnerships here in Pittsburgh, national partnerships. You could talk a little bit about, Carmen, if you want. I don't want to take away.
Oh, well, so we were riding 2 bikes made by Royal Enfield, which is a company that started. Of course, you noticed. They're an Indian motorcycle company.
I was going to say.
Yeah,
it's like the old days of the Raj.
Right. So we're riding around on Royal Enfield, and Royal Enfield just so happens to have recently opened an office in North America, kind of to put their finger in the eye of Harley Davidson. They opened it up in Milwaukee. That's part of our coverage area. Yeah. So I made that connection, that it's a company in Milwaukee that has international appeal, that's trying to break into a market attracting young people. Like that was the bike that we were going to ride for this tour. So I contacted them and said, we're doing this. And they said, oh, sure, we'll give you a couple bikes, because they hand out test bikes all the time to journalists. Mostly they're journalists for motorcycle magazines who are writing about the specs and all the stuff that I embarrassingly know nothing about. I've been riding motorcycles for decades, and I seriously don't know the first thing about them. And that's why I can write about them in a way that's not really about the bike. It's about the journey, right? So the means of conveyance is the way to pique your interest in telling a story about a region that is often misunderstood or just popped in on every once in a while by national media. So we use motorcycles as the means to get people to give a shit about something that we think is important. I always tell people that when I'm doing a story like this where we inject motorcycling into it, it's like when you have to give your dog that heartworm medicine, so you wrap it in a piece of cheese or some peanut butter. The motorcycles are the cheese or the peanut butter, right? To take the medicine. And it works. It works. Jason and I did a story for Outside Magazine that he wrote where we were riding motorcycles covering the war in Iraq. There's not going to be a story in there about what's going on in Iraq and the fact that Iraq is actually quite beautiful in Outside unless we chuck motorcycles into the mix, and that piques people's interest. So that's how we do it. I did a story about the Kurdish community in Nashville. It's the largest Kurdish community in the United States. And I spent a lot of time alongside the Kurds and the Peshmerga, the Kurdish army, during my time in Iraq, and it was great to get to know them in a different context, this community. And we injected motorcycling into that as well. So, and that's one of the most popular stories we ever produced at Post Industrial. So yeah, we partner with Royal Enfield to help us get that project underway. I will say that the crew that we used could have charged us a hell of a lot more and gave us a great deal for something that we're trying to, because they know we're trying to build something. Right. We're trying to build this into something that we want to eventually turn it into a series where we could ride to different parts of post-industrial America or do it state by state. When we were riding through West Virginia, I at one point said to Jason, we ought to do this. We can make a whole episode just about West Virginia, because we met this really interesting Palestinian woman who plays the violin, who lives in Charleston and teaches at a Montessori school, who had interesting things to tell us. We went to the New River Gorge, which everybody's excited that it's a new national park, except not everybody in town who live around New River Gorge is happy about it. In fact, a lot of them aren't, because it's attracting more people that are squeezing them out of their favorite place to fish and hang out that's in their own backyard.
So I think in part that some companies, they want that authenticity. And so we were fortunate in aligning with some companies, and we mentioned them, we tagged them on social media. But for them, it was sort of a very authentic display of this is real life, this is a real experience, storytelling. We were able to work in some safety with Snyder's Riders, which was a tremendous sponsor. They put the riders through safety paces. So it was a really great, inspiring experience for everyone. And it was, I think, just going out and kind of finding the right connections in terms of companies to align with.
And I think, though, that your reputation precedes you as veteran journalists, real journalists, legitimate journalists. Does it disturb you that online platforms are open to everybody, so fakers are also, on air, can also be accessed? They're also doing stuff under the guise of journalism. And how do you respond to that? Because I can think of a couple of people in town who are not journalists, who I would have written searing columns about them if we were still publishing, for suggesting that they knew what the hell they were talking about, but taking positions on politics and other things like that disturb me, because they do have a certain amount of following. How do you deal with that?
I feel like you can't focus all of your energy on those folks. I feel like you, Bertram, you have to just keep telling your truth and your stories and telling people what the hell is going on. But I think you need to find a new way that I know you're not going to like, because it probably has to do a lot with social media, to get people to hear you. You're just going to have to.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, you have all the tools. Again, I don't mean to harp on it, but like, all the tools are right there.
We're gonna
And you know what? After we're done with this, you're gonna talk to Kim, and then she's gonna give you some of the trade secrets, and maybe we'll figure out how to do all this shit together. But the fact of the matter is, all that stuff's right there, and the means by which to get it out to people is relatively inexpensive, and in some cases, it's free. You could just fire up that Facebook account of yours again, and Bertram, I guarantee you, people are gonna read what you have to say. A young ceramicist that had left town and came back again, I told him I was with Bertram de Souza the other day. He's like, oh, yeah, of course. He knows who you are. I mean, people know who you are. People know the Vindicator and the people that produce it.
He has to learn how to use social media. He has hundreds.
No, he doesn't.
He has hundreds of friend requests that he doesn't even know how to respond to.
No. You have to stop. And Bertram, I don't mean to talk about you in front of you, but like, don't try to teach. Okay, but don't. No. Let Bertram just do what Bertram does, and somebody else figure it out. He shouldn't even know what his own Facebook password is.
Say that. He'll call me.
Thank you.
He does. He should not know.
Is that what we're here for?
Need him for.
My ex-wife thanks you. She gave me a year of her life, as did Robert, publishing the book.
No, you find someone else. You know what? Go over to YSU and get some journalism.
Good idea.
Because that's what they learn now. They learn social media.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know
Get
what?
over to YSU and figure that out.
I know what you mean, though, because I have to say some of that does concern me.
Right.
I started a small business when I was still in the newsroom. Like I said, it had nothing to do with journalism, but the reason that I did it, and I didn't know what I was doing. I bought a rental property. I bought an 8-unit building. Everyone thought I was out of my mind, and at the time I probably was. I didn't know how to do anything. But the reason that I did it is because I wanted to teach myself, I want to have a business. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a journalist who owned a business and apply all of those things together. So it's hard because it requires kind of making your own path and making your own way. And there were certain kinds of journalism and certain kinds of writing and editing that I just said to myself, I'm not going to do those things. And if other people wanted to, fine. But I just said, I'm going to have this other thing over here. So I'm only going to do what I want. which sounds terrible, but it's true. So
Sounds
I
pretty
think,
great to me.
well, only doing what you, yeah, but it is, I think it does water down what you would hope people might pay attention to, right? If there's there's just so much out there for people to use. And journalism becomes a concept that means something to other journalists, but I'm not sure to the average person if that means what we hope it would mean, and if it has sort of the importance. So but I agree with Carmen. You just have to just keep, saying what you think is important, producing the work you think is important, giving people what maybe they should be thinking about or paying attention to, try to reach as many as possible. And
Yeah, you got to trick them. Sometimes you just do. Because again, going back to you can't get if there's too much competition, and it has nothing to do with journalism. It's just there's too much competition for our attention, our eyes, and our what we care about.
And our time.
It's too much. I get anxious about all the different shows I'm not watching that I'm supposed to watch. Fuck, everybody's always talking. I'm sorry, everyone's always talking about, like, did you see this? I know I haven't seen Game of Thrones because I'm too concerned about trying to get through the other stuff that everybody tells me I have to watch. Yeah. And then I just end up watching The Office again. I mean, it's too much. And so, we're not going to get it. It's not going to go back to the way it was. We have to figure out how to make it better, and make it for this new era. And I think like I said, all the tools are right there. We could have a very long, frank discussion about it after we're done recording.
We will, but we won't do it today because we've got to finish off this segment.
Sure.
But we will be in touch. I forwarded your email that I got from Kim to Cindy and to Robert, so they know what we're talking about in general.
Right.
And at some point, we'll all get together, have a phone conversation or whenever, and sort of chat about the future. We'd love to do that.
Great.
We really do appreciate your time. It's been wonderful. We're going to package this, and that's the only thing I needed to talk to you about is, so this is 3 segments. The first one, of course, we had Marty Byrne from the Washington Post, retired executive editor. Then we had Mark Sweetwood with Mahoning Matters, that's funded by Google, until next year, through next year, I guess. And then we've got you that created your own and are doing your own thing. And I think this is an important package because it speaks to the future of, media and the future of the press and what's going to happen. So we're going to try and figure out how to package it and to get as wide distribution as we can, and then we'll talk to you about that as well if you don't mind. So we'll be in touch.
Absolutely, sounds great.
Thanks a lot, appreciate it. Nice meeting you, Kim. Nice to see you again, Carmen.
Take care, everybody.
And I'll give you a call soon, Kim, and we'll set up a time and a day.
Maybe next week.
Okay.
You owe us a column.
What's that?
You owe us a column.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get you started.
I don't know that, but I think you do.
Okay.
How about next week, Bertram?
Okay.
We can talk next week.
That'll be great. That'll be
okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it again.
Cool.
Bye.
Great meeting everybody too.
Great meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So we've done a 3-part podcast on the future of what I call the legitimate press. And obviously the reason it interests us more than anything else is because we were witness to the closing of a 150-year-old newspaper. And it still affects us to a large extent. But we've also been, among ourselves and others, been talking about what lies ahead. What replaces newspapers, if anything can. And so when we conceive this podcast of a discussion. I'm grateful that we were able to get Marty Barron, the retired executive editor of the Washington Post, who spent an hour or so with us and gave us some great insight, including how the Washington Post has transitioned to being owned by one of the richest men in the world, and whether the concerns about what kind of influence he was going to wield have come about. Then we talked to Mark Sweetwood for the second segment, who is the local editor of Mahoning Matters, which is what's usually called the Compass Experiment, where it's an online, digital news platform funded by Google, and that funding runs through next year, and then they're going to be having to find their own revenue. And finally, the third part is with Carmen Gentile and Kim Palmiero of Post-Industrial Media in Pittsburgh, also two veteran newspaper journalists who've also gone off on their own to create another news platform differently. They're selling advertising and all of that. So I think what I came away with is I still am not sure how these various online entities provide the whole array of news that newspapers have traditionally provided.
I don't think they're going to,
Okay.
and that's
And I don't think they're looking to either.
They're not
And
looking
so
to,
then
exactly.
how do people then get that, or do they not care anymore?
Well, the question that I wasn't able to ask them because we ran out of time was when they formed Post-Industrial Media, what were the parameters that they set for themselves? What kind of news were they going to cover? Because obviously they're not covering community news, club news, sports,
No,
all of
not
that
at
kind
all,
of
yeah.
stuff. So they set up certain parameters. So that's going to be, and it seems like that's what he was talking about toward the end, that each outlet now is going to be more concise.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be what
They're all trying to
was put
find
into
their
a broadsheet.
specialty areas that they can cover
Exactly,
that
yeah.
the broader media is not
Right.
covering. So they're
But they're covering 12 states, you said?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So they've
All
taken
down
on
to Alabama.
they've taken on a huge geographical area, but in
Focusing
terms of,
on post-industrial.
Right.
And that's what their focus is what are these regions doing, how are they dealing
and
with
strictly news.
They're not interested in covering daily news and all of that.
Right.
There has been some discussion, and Carmen and I had that, is about, is it possible to create local, wire services for local news, like the Associated Press, or so for example, in the Mahoning Valley, we get all these retired journalists together and say, okay, and go to every news outlet and say, we will go and cover all of the meetings, we'll cover the council, we'll cover all of these things, and we'll generate stories which we'll give to you, like the AP does, but you sort of subscribe to the news service. Whether or not that's doable, I don't know. Whether there's interest in that, I don't know. That's what I'm still not clear is, do Americans actually care that much now about getting the whole comprehensive news coverage that we used to provide?
I think everyone gets their news a different way. Where it used to be delivered to your doorstep, now it needs to be pushed to you. That I want it delivered to me via my phone, via when something important's happening, I don't want to wait the next day and read a reflection on it, or I want to know now what's going
Yeah,
on.
because I get news alerts from the local stations and the national networks and the cable stations. But I mean, my question is, you had kids who were involved in sports. Where do they
Exactly.
get local sports news now? I mean, you get bits of it on your broadcasts at 6
And this is where
and
you
11,
find
but-
the other social media has taken over, where you'll see people sharing, oh, here's my photos from today's game where they won, or we're going. So
So rather than news coverage, it's actually a more personal.
it's community
It's
spread.
sharing of,
It's community spread, And
Yeah.
then the same even with like the society type news, where
Yeah.
if you need to let people know you're having a bake sale or whatever, well, they go to social media now and share that, hey, we're selling this.
And
Yeah.
yet we know that when we were publishing, society, the society page in the society department was one of the most sought after by our readers.
Well, it was, but then at the end, it wasn't.
Because things changed,
Yeah.
obviously. But even sports being mentioned in the sports pages, the sports scores, the little thumbnails of all every game that we covered.
Yeah.
I mean, do people no longer want that stuff?
I think the news cycle. Everyone has become an adrenaline junkie. That I get it now.
Yeah.
I don't have to wait. I don't have to read. Someone writing me the next day of what happened at the game. I saw the game, but where we tried to give them more,
And you get
in
the
depth.
pictures that night. The parents are sharing the photographs
Right.
Yeah.
immediately,
Yeah.
so they don't
So
really.
it's a trade-off of what you're
Yeah.
getting.
Yeah.
I sort of, I guess the common theme in all three segments was that, as Marty Barron from the Washington Post pointed out, there's not going to be another newspaper starting up in this country.
Even the digital editions of newspapers, I think, are going to go by the wayside.
Right.
Because you had to have, in order to have the digital edition to
You have
turn
to
the pages, you had to have.
Because of content.
Yeah.
I guess you could
Right.
still have the pages done on computers and do it that way, but it seems like.
But as Marty
big
pointed
waste.
out, as Marty Barron pointed out, most of their new investment at the Washington Post is online. Is
Yeah.
for the online edition.
And
Right.
It's not.
I'm just thrilled to see the journalists are finding a new way
Yeah.
to keep it going.
Right.
It's not just something that is going away.
Yeah.
They're reinventing what we've
Yeah.
always done.
So as we talked to Mark Sweetwood, I guess all of these entities, these platforms, the digital, all have to find what their niche is,
Yeah.
and sort of what road they're going to follow, and keep to that because.
And they're going to have to advertise their existence,
Right.
And that's the harder part.
That's the harder part, I guess,
Where
but-
you knew the community newspaper, we didn't have to go out and sell. Hey, we're here.
We're here.
You knew who we were.
Exactly,
So-
yeah. I mean, I talk to a lot of people, they don't even know Mahoning Matters exists.
Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of people don't. You have to be online and you have to subscribe
And
to
that
it.
and so what
And you have to
happened?
generate that community conversation that says, oh my God, did you see that? Used to say, oh my God, did you see that story in the
Right.
Vindicator?
Right.
I'm not hearing, oh my God, did you see that story
Yeah.
on Mahoning Matters?
We're an older community, so
Right.
which gets
Yeah.
its news.
But by the way, and then what happens to a region that has an older population like ours? I mean, the senior population in the
Listen.
region is growing, but how many of those people actually
You'd be surprised.
spend a lot of time on their?
You would be
Oh, yeah,
surprised.
there's-
There was a piece on 60 Minutes the other day where they've been following these 100-year-old people from the time they were 90, I think, and they're doing periodic, every couple years they're going back to them. These people are all using computers. My mother was using a computer when she was 81. And that was years ago. She's been
you
gone
figure-
for
But how
about
much
15
time
years.
do they actually spend as opposed to young people, and how much time they spend? My God, I mean
the people who are now in their 30s have had computers their entire lives, and they,
Exactly.
this is
Yeah.
second nature to them.
Yeah,
So
and that's how they communicate with their families now. And I think that the pandemic
I think it did.
probably
Right.
has
Yes.
increased that
Right.
because that's how
I
everybody
couldn't
was
see you
keeping
in
touch.
persons, but I can.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think we did something good. Maybe I don't know. We'll see what happens when we package it and post it on scribblergroup.com, and then on the other various Facebook and all of that, and see if we can get obviously the Post Industrial will be willing to put it on all of their platforms that they use as a package, and I think that might generate some interest. Thank you both. And also thank you, Andy Kunkel, for keeping us all in focus, I hope. And we are working on something else, another podcast that would be very different and would get a lot of interest if it comes about. So we'll be talking about that soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.